Alright guys, Murph's here. And today at viewer request we're going to discuss a program that was started in the SOCOM community that was bent towards adopting the 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge. Now, the viewer that requested this was specifically talking about an assaulter carbine, which was supposed to be running like a downloaded 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge in order for it to be more manageable under rapid shot strings. This is admittedly a program that I'd never heard of, so I started doing some research. And I came across a couple of things. Now, guys, I'm going to start with kind of a broad strokes thing, and we're going to spiral our way into the actual program. So if this is taking a little while here in the beginning, go ahead and check in the description for the chapters section and jump to content that you actually want to consume. The 6.5 Creedmoor has had exceedingly limited use in the special operations community, and a lot of that comes down to COTS type purchases or commercial off the shelf. Every unit in the Army has some discretionary funds that they can utilize in order to buy equipment that is not fielded by the military but serves a specific need. And this was something that was commonly used all throughout the GWOT, because the GWOT saw a lot of like enemy trends and stuff like that transition or progress very rapidly. And there's this whole, cat and mouse game of like action and counteraction and all those types of things. With that being the case, in that type of like rapid threat development arena, the United States military, or any military, is very slow to be able to react. When you're talking about like actual Army programs of record or military programs of record, they take roughly about 5 years to come into full fruition and be able to deliver what it is that's required on the battlefield. If you wait for that development to be complete, you'll be dead by then, or at least a lot of your guys will be dead by that time. So the Army does get the flexibility to commands to be able to purchase things that they need. And then there's a whole like approval process that it has to go through and allocating the funds and all those types of things. It's not a very simple process, but it is something that can be done. And COTS is supposed to be a band-aid. It's supposed to be something that it's a stopgap solution up until a dedicated solution can be come up with later. Problem is, during GWOT, a lot of times real solutions never necessarily came along. The problem with going the COTS route, so let's say your unit wants to buy 6.5 Creedmoor sniper rifles, the problem with going the COTS route is that you don't have a maintenance plan that goes along with it. Every military adopted piece of equipment, every program of record, the record is having the ability to be able to maintain it, either by hiring contractors or by training military personnel in the maintaining of that particular equipment. Now, if you have an adoption at a high enough level, a COTS package could come with a repair or replacement package as well. However, those contracts only last for so long. So what winds up happening is if you break it, or if you need spare parts, or you need to order consumables or anything along those lines, you have to go through the entire process of approval to be able to have that purchased through COTS or off of a government purchase card or whatever it is that it may be. Now, guys, keep in mind, I am no logistician. Never have been, never will be. So I don't intimately understand the military procurement process and all those types of things, but I have a pretty broad strokes understanding. At one point, I worked with a Special Forces team that had a suppressed Glock 22 in their inventory. So obviously the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge was never adopted by the military. It is not a standard offering at all. And they were kind of taking a feather out of CAG's cap, who was doing something very similar at the time, which makes sense because the team I was working with was a CRIF team. Well, that's pleasant. So, sorry, just cracked this bottle, so this is the first glass. So they had that weapon system. They sourced it through whatever colors of money it is that they could source it through, which when you get into SOCOM, like there's all kinds of different colors of money, especially when you're working at like the level of a CRIF or with like, CAG and all those types of things. There's a lot of colors of money that are involved in that. And it also becomes very interesting from a military procurement standpoint because your budget's being looked over at the congressional level. So there's some captain who's holding a budget that like some congressman is like looking over his shoulder for. Kind of interesting. Regardless, let's say that team went to Finland, and it would not be unusual for a special forces team to bring a bunch of ammunition with them. Now, if they were deep into their middle mission or whatever it is in Finland, and they needed a resupply of ammunition, they would be able to more readily coordinate and receive standard ammunition, 5.56, 9mm, 7.62, 50 cal, all that kind of stuff from the United States military faster than they would be able to get 40 Smith & Wesson. So whatever 40 Smith & Wesson they bring is probably the amount of 40 Smith & Wesson that they have. Now, of course, in this case, the team's not only bringing their Glock 22 or however many Glock 22s they have, they would bring the rest of their weapon systems as well. It's just something that has to be taken into account. When you step outside of the military system, you take on the onus for procurement. You take on the onus for maintaining. You take on the onus for supplying the consumables and all those types of things. The military can get a hold of non-standard ammunition types, but there's a process that's involved with it that's relatively in-depth and not necessarily something that's just like, oh yeah, got it, bud. I went on Midway USA and ordered a whole bunch of 40 Smith & Wesson for you. It'll be here in a week type of deal. So those are the things that you have to take into account. So that is why SOCOM was looking for a program of record with the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, this is not the first time that they've done this type of thing. When Colt did not give them adequate answers to why the M4 carbine was falling apart on them, the SOCOM community decided to hold what would become the SCAR program. And this is where we get the Mark 16, Mark 17 SCARs. So SOCOM decided that they wanted to look further into the use of the 6.5 Creedmoor for precision type purposes, but not just precision type purposes. So the program, which I had a lot of difficulty finding a name for this program. Any article that I read really didn't have a whole lot. It seems like the program stood up around 2018, and the goals were to adopt first a DMR and then a machine gun. Now, I found no mention of an assaulter carbine, but I even Googled that, like specifically. I was looking around. I didn't find any reference to this, but we did have the DMR. And what they would start out with doing was taking M110s and rebarreling them over to 6.5 Creedmoor. There was relative success with that, at least enough in order to be able to advance the program and start putting together what they wanted the technical data package to look like for this DMR. And they would wind up putting out a solicitation for manufacturers to participate in the bidding. A couple of manufacturers would respond, most notably Geisley and Aero. Precision would submit offerings for the contract, and this would be the MRGG, the medium range gas gun. Now, medium range, what do we mean by that? Well, when we're talking about engaging with a DMR, we're talking about like the 3 to under 800 meter engagement envelope. Now, guys, we all know that 6.5 Creedmoor can reach out much further than that. 6.5 Creedmoor can go out to 1,200 meters. However, that's getting into sniper-designated engagements. We're looking at DMRs, and it's very important to keep in mind that when you're talking about this stuff doctrinally, when you say this guy's a designated marksman, there's an engagement envelope that the commander is supposed to be able to like see in his head as to what this guy's supposed to be able to do. Now, it doesn't matter if Jim over here is able to engage with that rifle out to 1,000 meters. He has the projection that the commander sitting at the talk or whatever has to keep in mind is like, I know this guy is supposed to be able to, at the drop of a hat, engage between 3 and 700 meters. He absolutely can do that. Now, if the commander on the ground is like, Jim, there's a guy 1,200 meters over that way, and I need you to take a poke at him, I'm pretty sure you can do it, then that's fine. That's the discretion of the commander on the ground. But Jim was sent there because he was expected to be able to engage between 3 and 8. And that was like the furthest that he was supposed to be shooting out to. If we needed anything further, we were going to bring a sniper. That's how the planning process is supposed to work. A mortarman is supposed to engage out to this distance. A machine gunner is supposed to engage out to this distance. And that is how you build plans based off of those types of capabilities. Tanks can go this far, blah, 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 blah. Geisley would actually wind up winning the competition for their offering, which is very interesting. Which then moves us into the light machine gun assault, which is kind of weird because like an assault machine gun isn't in every machine gun an assault machine gun. But regardless, what I think of when I hear this, and especially once I looked at like the technical data package and all that kind of stuff, is basically a Mark 48 chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor, which for those of you who don't know, the Mark 48 is a 249 that was upgunned to 308 or 7.62 caliber. It was something that was really popular amongst like SOCOM teams and other units in like the past like 10 years. So this lightweight, this LMG-A, as it's referred to, is kind of an interesting choice. A lot of people might be sitting there like, well, why would you want a 6.5 Creedmoor machine gun? Like, it's not a machine gun's not a precision weapon. Well, keep in mind, guys, machine guns are area effect weapons. They're supposed to be used for suppression and all those types of things. Fix an enemy so that you can close to within grenade range, pepper them with some shrapnel, and then get up and take the trench, type of deal. However, everyone benefits from a flatter shooting trajectory when it comes to shooting. The less correction you have to make to your sights, the better opportunity for your burst to land where it is that you need to and develop a good beaten zone and all those types of things. So it's not like it hurts anybody to have the 6.5 Creedmoor, but one of the limitations that we were running into here was that there was no standard dodic for 6.5 Creedmoor in the military. It's never been adopted. So the ammunition available for the 6.5 Creedmoor on the market is, ballistic tip, soft points, hunting type loads, as well as match type loads, which are going to wind up being really expensive, and I wouldn't even want to run the first two through a machine gun. And a machine gun doesn't really need match type loads. So, of course, this would require a development of new ammunition, because you're going to need to have the same types of ammunition as you have in your 7.62 rounds. So you need a blank, you need a AP round, a tracer, a ball round, and a match round as well for the designated marksman's rifle. And one of the articles that I ran into, one of the last articles I ran into on this subject, which is dated around like 2020, was talking about also going to buy material ammunition. And this is very interesting because this brings us into the NGSW program as well as the XM5. Let me move this over before I knock it over. There. Stay right there. So they were looking at getting into the buy material ammunition, which involves like a steel case head with a plastic cartridge attached to it. And the idea here is that you're trying to decrease the weight of the ammunition. One of the things about going to a full power rifle cartridge is that you wind up incurring a whole bunch of weight and size and diminished amount of ammunition for the same surface area. So where you could fit, 6 30-round magazines, you're going to fit like 4 7.62 mags. And it's going to weigh pretty comparably to the 5.56 rounds. Now, something else to keep in mind is like fighting in Ukraine right now, a lot of those guys are running around with like 16 magazines. So 16 magazines at 30 rounds a pop is a lot of ammunition. 16 magazines at 20 rounds a pop is not an insignificant amount of ammunition, but it's not nearly as much as 30. And as somebody who has carried a 7.62 rifle instead of a 5.56 rifle, I was very keenly aware of the fact that I had less ammunition than everyone else. Now, I had a specialized purpose at that point, so it wasn't as important for me to have a whole bunch of rounds. Like, I was in a designated marksman capacity, so I wasn't necessarily supposed to like seize the trench. I was supposed to assist in the seizing of the trench, type of deal. So me having more rounds wasn't as important. But all throughout GWOT, there were a lot of people who were running around with just combat load of 210 rounds. Maybe a spare magazine thrown in a backpack or something like that, or an ammo can full of loaded magazines in the truck. But that's an idea that we get away from once we get into like large-scale combat operations, where you are going to probably need more ammo in order to be able to sustain the fight. So the buy material cases become very interesting at that point. Now, the LMG-A for sure was curbed by the NGSW program because SIG would wind up winning that contract, with the 6.8 by 51 millimeter cartridge being adopted as well. And it would appear to me that the MRGG also got shelved based on the XM5 and all those types of things. It would not be surprising to me if somebody suggested trying to get the same armor penetrating capabilities out of the 6.5 Creedmoor as the 6.8 has, or also known as the 277 Fury. But from what I can tell, like, I think it was more like somebody probably dropped that idea in a meeting and then everyone was summarily like, it's just not worth it. The military's move to the 6.8 is already kind of odd to me to begin with, because we're really pushing the armor penetration capability and kind of ignoring all the other aspects that's going on with that. Like, that's an incredibly high pressure cartridge and all those types of things. It's kind of the same thing in the 6.5 Creedmoor, if I'm being completely honest. So with those programs being shelved, Murph, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's something that should have been continued in development? I think we already have like a clip of that. No, I don't. A little foreshadowing there before we came into the actual question. But my issue with the 6.5 Creedmoor is that the 6.5 Creedmoor was purpose designed for long-range shooting. You can hear all about that in my 6.5 Creedmoor video that I've done previously, cartridge discussion video. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. So there's two things in this. One, this cartridge is completely designed for long range. How deep the bullet's seated, the length of the neck, the dimensions of the casing, and all those types of things. This is all built for long range. This was not really built with semi-automatic guns in mind, and definitely not necessarily with military application of semi-automatic guns in mind. So I have been observing 6.5 like AR-10s and stuff like that for years, and have found that they seem to generally be very prone to malfunction. And it's kind of led me away from them to begin with, from consideration, and I chalk that up to the design of the cartridge casing. It wasn't designed with this in mind. It shouldn't be surprised that it doesn't work all that great in a gas gun. Now, if you're sitting around shooting PRS or just popping some holes in paper at the range, it's not that big of a deal. If you're in the middle of combat, it's a very big deal. In addition to that, it definitely wasn't designed to be a machine gun cartridge. And while a machine gunner's mantra is pop, the less time he has to spend clearing malfunctions, the better. It's better able to be able to keep that machine gun in the fight. And I consider that to be way more critical than having a flatter shooting trajectory. And that's the other side of this. The 6.5 Creedmoor for long-range applications has a flatter shooting trajectory, but it's really not that flat. It's not even the flattest 6.5 that's out there. So I feel like that loses some context a little bit. Like people get really bent out of shape over like, oh, 6.5's like a laser beam. Like, it's really not. It's not. Now, at long range, it might constitute a laser beam because you're not having as much pressure to your sights as you would on 308. But in the more intermediate distances, I don't think you're going to notice as much of a flat shooting profile to it. That's been my observation, at least. I'm not that blown away by its ballistic arc or lack thereof, purported lack thereof. That doesn't mean I like the 6.8 any better, the high pressures and all those types of things. Personally think that it's just entirely too niche and they're trying to make it very broad, but that's neither here nor there. Now, something else to note is that this program was also working on an LMG-A mid-range, which was supposed to be chambered in 338 Norma, which that's kind of interesting all by itself and is the direction that the military is going with the new heavy machine gun. Heavy. It's actually a lighter weight package than what you get out of a 50 cal. While having the same ballistic ranges and all those types of things, but that's a totally different discussion. So, all right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. Hope you guys found this interesting. That's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.